These days, when you think of what the most dangerous neighborhood of a major city in America looks like, you're probably thinking that it'll be full of abandoned buildings, graffiti, liquor stores, cash checking places, maybe homeless camps, maybe a row of cheap-looking slums, a plasma donation center here, a plasma donation center there, and you're totally jamming to this music here. But when you actually see Denver's most dangerous area, you're probably going to feel dumbfounded. When given the eye test, it'll be difficult to process that this neighborhood that you're about to see in this video is actually ranked as the most dangerous neighborhood in Denver. As in, there are more reports of violent crime and property crime in this neighborhood here than anywhere else in the Mile High City. Well, I invaded Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood in late August of 22. I must have been driving around this part of town right after the city cleared out a bunch of homeless camps or something, because I didn't really see any of that this time around. But don't let the clean look fool you, because if you decide to go see this part of Denver for yourself these days, like if you pick any random day or if you decide to head on over right after you see this video to Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood, you're bound to see at least one homeless camp taking up an entire block somewhere within the boundaries. I mean, the homeless population here has only increased by 2,000 since the time that I filmed this, but honestly, the number is probably way higher than that, because imagine how hard it must be to get a count of exactly how many homeless people there are in an area. Well, if not that, if you don't see any tent cities, you're definitely bound to see some business owners marching over to the Colorado State Capitol building to protest the human excrements that magically seem to appear in front of their small downtown area storefront every morning. My goodness, imagine having to deal with that. Technically, there are two neighborhoods that we go through in this video, with North Capitol Hill being the other, but this is Colfax and Broadway, in which the Denver Police Department has recently labeled this street corner as being the most dangerous hotspot in the city, as in, more crime happens on this street corner than anywhere else in Denver. Now, this street corner also serves as a major bus stop. The state capitol and the Department of Public Health are right here too. And once again, surprisingly, there was no tent city here when I came through this time. But when I came through earlier in the year, it was a completely different scene. Aside from the two times in the summer of 22, when I passed by this intersection of Colfax and Broadway, I also came through here two times in the summer of 23. And even though I didn't get footage of it in 23, either of the two times that I passed by, I can promise you that I saw a band of homeless people at this intersection 3 out of the 4 times that I passed by within the last couple of years. Usually the crime that happens at Colfax and Broadway is assault. And usually it originates after two bums get in a dumb argument with each other. Maybe one person asks the other for a square, which is a cigarette, and they refuse, even though they have a fresh pack. Or maybe someone says something about the other person's mama. But don't worry, if you get stuck here in this spot, just don't interact with anyone, and you should be fine. Just ignore anyone who tries to bother you. Anyway, we're not just going to talk about the negative things about Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood, as there's plenty of positive stuff to talk about too, and there's plenty of history to go over. So we'll get into all of that within this video. Well, since the state capitol building is to the left, there's many other government buildings that surround it. But standing out of the crowd to the right, we just passed by the First Baptist Church of Denver, which has been around since 1864. And even though this church was established only 3 years after Denver became a city, it's actually not the oldest church in the Mile High City. We actually passed by the one holding that crown a few minutes ago off of Broadway and 18th, which is the Trinity United Methodist Church, with the first service being held in 1859. And yes, this is the lead song for the worship service every Sunday. True story, people. You have other cultural landmarks here too, like the Scottish Rite Masonic Center, which was built in 1925. And before we move on, here's an even better view of the state capitol building. But anyway, with Capitol Hill being one of the oldest neighborhoods in Denver, being located right next to downtown, and being the location for many of the state government functions, it's only natural to see a collection of buildings with significant historic value. You You can see a lot more of this too in Denver's Civic Center neighborhood, which I invaded in my first Denver video when I went through downtown. And to see a video on that, make sure to check out my Denver playlist once you're done watching this video, in which the link for that will be down below. Alright, so more on the crime in Denver, as this will require some context, so hear me out. Denver is a city with a patterned history. What I mean by that is that Denver has seen a history with periods of extreme growth followed by periods of stagnant growth. Here's a graph because it makes me feel smart and cool. Currently, Denver is in the beginning stages of one of those longer periods of stagnant growth, with the pandemic being the turning point. Before that, Denver was one of the largest growing cities in the country for about a 10-year stretch. Most of you probably know that and have heard about that. Anyway, with the periods of stagnant growth, Denver has seen large upticks in crime, historically speaking. The last time that this happened in the Mile High City was during the 80s, during what was called the oil crash, when the price of oil plummeted by as much as 67%. During that time, the Denver economy was largely dependent on the oil and gas industry, as the city still to this day has several headquarters for major oil companies, and these are companies that you've probably never heard of. Companies such as DCP Midstream or Ovintiv, which both happen to be Fortune 500 companies. Since then, however, Denver's economy has diversified quite nicely. That's something that Denver has done really well. There are as many as 10 Fortune 500 companies within the Denver metro area today. 2 of them being the oil companies that I shared a second ago, with 2 others being in that same blue-collar field. 4 of them are tech companies. 1 is a clothing company, with the last in the top 10 being a medical provider. So all of that combined gives the Denver metro area economy a nice diverse spread of industries with a strong presence, and that's always healthy for a major metropolitan area to have. So yeah, during the 1980s, Denver saw a large uptick in crime across the city. Denver was even gaining a reputation of being one of the more dangerous large cities in the country because of that, and it could be blamed largely on the decline of the oil industry as thousands of jobs were lost, creating a higher rate of unemployment and poverty, which will usually almost always result in a large increase in crime for any major city. But that was the 1980s, and this time around, during this period of stagnant growth for the Denver metro area, most of it can be attributed towards the high cost of living that the area sees. The economy is fine for the most part, especially when you compare it to other metro areas of similar size. Denver is doing just fine in that category. But the home prices here, they might not be California prices or New York City prices, but the Denver metro area still sees a 36% higher than average rate in the cost of housing when compared to the data for the country as a whole. Additionally, the cost of living overall is considered to be 11% higher than the national average. But the housing costs, it's a major problem because wages overall have not kept up with the inflation of the housing prices. This is the story for the entire country, not just Denver. But Denver saw the housing prices inflate more so than other metro areas because of the large population spike over the prior decade. But anyway, today we're basically seeing middle-class families that should be able to afford a nice home in the suburbs not be able to afford a nice home in the suburbs. So these people are starting to move away from the Denver metro area simply based on the fact that they can't afford to live there comfortably. I'll get back to that conversation in a second, as to the right, we just passed by the Ogden Theater, which is a popular concert venue. It can seat up to 1,600, and it's been open since 1917. A few buildings further down the street is a larger concert venue, that being the Fillmore, which opened in 1907. So basically, all the Mountain Dew drinking Hilljacks of the Denver area all band together at this stretch of Colfax to party it up once in a while with the 2 concert venues. Alright, back to business. As really quick, the data shows that the top 3 markets for people to relocate to from Denver since 2020 would be Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and Colorado Springs. And there are 2 points that I want to reiterate from the conversation over the higher price of homes in Denver. The first one being that the reason why the inflation happened here so badly in the first place was because of the massive population boom that Denver saw during the prior decade. The second point is one that I'll use to help transition to the next talking point, and it's that the cost of housing is partially why there's been such a drastic increase in homelessness in Denver. It's not a huge part of the picture, at least I don't think so, but it is a small part of it. So if that's only a small part of it, what would be some of the bigger reasons? Well, let's dive into it, shall we? One of the biggest reasons as to why there's been such an upsurge in homelessness in Denver is because of the recent upsurge in migrant workers. For example, in May of 2023, Denver saw a peak of as many as 300 migrants arriving daily from the US-Mexico border. That's an insane amount of new permanent and long-term temporary residents in the area. Most of these migrant workers are also arriving with very little money and no job lined up, so they end up being homeless. To the right, this is the Cathedral Basilica of the Immaculate Conception of Denver, with the building being completed in 1921. The building pays tribute to Denver's strong history with gold, as it has beautiful gold doors along its Colfax Avenue entrance, along with a nice Gothic Revival style to the building, which is a pretty unique style of architecture to see in cities this far west. But yeah, most of these migrant workers, they arrive into Denver with very little money and no job lined up, so they end up being homeless a lot of the times if they can't get into one of the shelters in the area that are at max capacity. Well, here's a nicely illustrated graph that was shared by the Denverite that shows just how many migrant workers have been flocking to Denver this year. It looks like there were as many as 1,700 in January, and it looks like January was the peak, not May. Anyway, another surge in late March to early April is seen here, with another surge in May, and the most recent surge coming in September. These migrant workers will typically come to Denver on a bus from Texas, and if these migrant workers don't stay in the downtown Denver area, they head on over to the second largest city in the Denver metro area in Aurora to the east. So they all seem to be settling in particular areas in the region, in downtown Denver and in Aurora, with a few scattered here and there throughout the rest of the region. But the city doesn't have the resources to be able to properly handle the Pacific Coast-like homeless crowd that moved to Denver on top of this upsurge in migrant workers, so we're basically seeing more and more tent cities pop up around the downtown Denver area. I know it doesn't fit well with the footage that you see here because we're not seeing any of the tent cities that I'm speaking of, but trust me, homeless camps are here in late 2023, and it's continuing to grow with no signs of slowing down. Experts that study the pattern of migrants in the United States say that Denver is ideal for migrants from Mexico because of the policies that the city of Denver provides along with the state of Colorado. And no, I'm not talking about marijuana because half of the states now do that, but also because Texas is sending more buses than ever before, sending as many as 1,000 migrants to Denver since this past May. These buses are being sent by the state government of Texas while they work with nonprofits in their area. Andrew Mahalaris, who is a spokesperson for Texas Governor Greg Abbott, had something really interesting to say that stuck out to me on the issue, and that was that sending the migrant buses to Denver was supposed to send a message, further saying that these hypocritical mayors across the country were all too happy to brag about their sanctuary city statuses during 2020, but that was only until Texas started to bus over as many as 36,000 migrants to these sanctuary cities across the country. Other cities that have seen migrants being bused from Texas include Chicago, Philadelphia, D.C., and New York City, among several others. Anyway, former Denver Mayor Mike Hancock, whose term ended in July of 2023, so fairly recently at the time of me uploading this video, former Mayor Hancock called the act of Texas sending migrant buses to Denver political theater. Now, something that people will like to pile on me for in the comments sections whenever I talk about controversial subjects like this, or subjects that seem to draw strong differentiating opinions among the population, such as the homeless and migrant population in Denver, is that they'll say,
"Oh, Denver isn't the only city, it's every city in America."
And to that I say, yes, Denver isn't the only city where this is happening, but this is a video on Denver, so I'm talking about the problem here in Denver. And by the way, it's also not every city in America. I happen to live in a larger metro area than Denver, where this isn't happening in the city proper. That large city being Detroit. Now, Detroit has its other issues that Denver doesn't have quite as bad. But yes, you do have other places in the country where you see the homeless and migrant population exploding, like you're seeing it here in Denver. Cities such as Portland, Seattle, and even places east have a large homeless crowd, such as Philadelphia and New York City. But everything that I just mentioned can largely explain the reasons behind why there have been an ever-growing number of tent cities that dot the map around downtown Denver. Those are facts. And yes, some of it is due to the higher cost of housing, but more of it has to do with seeing the same crowd that we see on the West Coast in places like Seattle, San Francisco, and Portland, along with the large recent increase of migrants. Not to mention the opioid epidemic in Denver is quite strong, especially among the homeless crowd, and that doesn't help. With all of that being said, you're possibly wondering, what does all of this have to do with the crime in Denver? Well, crime has been rising in Denver at the same rate of the increase of the homelessness and migrants in the city. An example of that would be a separate article that goes over the rise in crime in Denver, which also happens to be from the Denverite. Thank you, Denverite, for all of the information that I'm able to steal from you. Much appreciated. But the article explains how in 2022, there were double the amount of aggravated assaults in Denver since 2012, and not only have assaults in Denver doubled, but homicides have tripled, going from a very low number for a major city by seeing only 31 homicides in 2014 to seeing 90 in 2022. In fact, here's a very telling graph that shows how Denver has seen a larger increase in crime than other cities that face similar issues to Denver. Denver has outpaced cities with worse reputations when it comes to homeless and migrants such as Portland, Seattle, Albuquerque, and Los Angeles. Denver has seen its crime rate spike up faster than what any of these other cities have seen during the same time frame. Now, there's no factual data to point a finger at any crowd, such as the homeless crowd or the migrant population, and I'm not saying that the rise in crime is solely due to the rise in numbers of people among those groups, even though some of you will try to cancel me in the comments section regardless and say that I am saying that. But I'm not saying that that's the reason at all, because there's no factual way to find the exact cause of all of this. It's a very vague subject, and all you can do is collect different types of information and come up with a theory, and when doing so, there's no way to avoid making anybody upset. Someone is always going to get offended no matter what reasonings you come up with, but through some of these stories that I've seen when researching this topic, a lot of the crime and complaints that residents have when looking at police reports and stories in the news, it has to do with the homeless population, whether homeless won't get off of their property or homeless are setting up a tent city in front of a business entrance, which deters their usual customer base away from their business even though they're staying open. You have a bunch of thefts, people among this crowd coming inside of these stores, shops, and restaurants and either flat out stealing things or manipulating workers into giving them free stuff. Harassing some of the customers and making the customer's experience a miserable one at no fault of the business. I also believe that Denver defunding the police in 2020 plays a huge role in the uptick in crime that we've seen here, as criminals feel more freedom to be able to go out and do criminal things and break laws because they feel like they can get away with it, such as feeling safe enough to get away with punching someone in the face or getting high on the street off of fentanyl, the new drug that's killing society, or smashing car windows and stealing cars. Heck, current Mayor Mike Johnston just had his car stolen from him during the week that I uploaded this video, only for it to be found in the neighboring city to the east in Aurora, which is another city in this region that has its own fair share of problems. Anyway, the state of Colorado has actually seen the fastest increase in autojackings out of the 50 states. That's right, that's a fact, and you can't argue the facts.
Nope.
From 2011 to 2020, the rate of auto theft in Colorado has increased by 144%. That is absolutely absurd. Fortunately, the data shows a decrease in auto thefts by 20% in 2022. So hopefully that can continue to decrease. But yeah, anyway, you can't argue the numbers available that clearly show that there's been a sudden surge in crime in what's mostly the city of Denver. There are many suburbs that are still very safe and nice places to live in the Denver metro area, yet very expensive. But that's aside from the point that I've mostly been talking about with crime, and Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood, where we are right now and where we have been throughout this video, is currently ranked as the most violent neighborhood in the city of Denver. Alright, so enough of that, and before we move on to the economic stats of today's Capitol Hill residents, I wanted to point out some other history about the neighborhood, and that is that Capitol Hill, when it was first developed, was home to Denver's wealthiest residents. The less wealthy residents resided on the west side of town in an area that was called Auraria. Today, that neighborhood is now a large college campus, and it's home to Ball Arena, where the Denver Nuggets and Colorado Avalanche play, so that neighborhood is no longer there. But Capitol Hill was developed around the time that the site was chosen for the Colorado State Capitol building in 1886. With the state capitol being right here, that attracted the wealthy, and that resulted in newer and luxurious homes being built here in Capitol Hill as Denver continued to expand eastward. Anyone important in town during the late 1800s and early 1900s had an address off of either Lincoln, Grant, Sherman, Logan, Pennsylvania, or Colfax within the Capitol Hill neighborhood. However, as the years went on, transportation developed and people no longer needed to live within walking distance of important places in downtown. So the new snobby trend among the wealthy, developing throughout the early 20th century, was owning a car and driving into work, so that their place of residence was far away from the pollution and crowdedness of the inner city. The old mansions that used to dot the Capitol Hill neighborhood were then converted into either offices or multi-unit residential buildings, or they ended up being demolished for larger office buildings, apartment buildings, or parking lots. Now, obviously, as you've seen here and there throughout this neighborhood tour, there are still several of these older late 19th and early 20th century mansions within the Capitol Hill neighborhood that are used as single-family homes. However, throughout today's Capitol Hill neighborhood, you also have groups like Historic Denver Incorporated that have worked hard to preserve these older mansions, so that's all good and dandy. Alright, so now we're going to go over the economic stats for both today's Capitol Hill and the North Capitol Hill neighborhood. We'll start with Capitol Hill. The population is 9,496, while the median household income is $63,000 per year. And that's not near high enough to be able to afford the homes in this neighborhood. So that suggests to me that most of the residents that live here rent. The median value of owner-occupied housing units is $342,000, proves my point, while the poverty rate is 9.8%. However, with that cost of living ratio, you can probably expect that more people are living paycheck to paycheck here than not. Now on to the stats for North Capitol Hill, which has a smaller population, being home to just over 5,000. The median household income is even lower at $52,000 per year, while 67% of adults, 25 and older, hold a bachelor's degree or higher. Also, the median value of owner-occupied housing units is $428,000, which is even higher than what we saw in non-directional Capitol Hill, despite the lower median household income in North Capitol Hill. So that's interesting, and the poverty rate is 10.9%. When it comes to the crime, yeah, not so good. The website Area Vibes has a crime rate put together for both the Capitol Hill and North Capitol Hill neighborhood, in which, by the way, most people just refer to both neighborhoods as Capitol Hill, but Area Vibes claims that the two neighborhoods combined see a violent crime rate of just over 1,100 for every 100,000 residents, while the property crime rate is through the roof at 6,800 for every 100,000 residents. Really, most of the crime here is really petty and annoying kind of crap, like the car thefts, stealing things from stores, stealing things from people's personal property, vandalism, trespassing, and the violent crime mostly comes in the form of assault. So just don't get in a bar fight with anyone here, and make sure that you practice jiu-jitsu if you do decide to live here, people. and put a GPS tracker on everything that you own, from the car that you drive to the set of golf clubs that were passed down to you from your grandpa. Yeah. If you decide to live here, yeah, you don't want to be messing around. Don't buy that new car either. Wait until later in your life to do that, because chances are you're going to be very upset one day when someone tries to do something to it. So for now, stick to that base model Mitsubishi Mirage. I mean, living here in the city, that would probably come in handy, having a compact car, being able to park in tight spaces like that. Yeah. By the way, look at this. The marijuana house. Only you, Denver. Only you. Well, I'll catch up with you guys towards the end of this video, where I'll give you my final thoughts on the Capitol Hill neighborhood, and that will be after I give it a Chris Livability score, which is a system that I put together where I score cities, and in this case, a neighborhood of a larger city, based on several categories, including things like education, crime, which you already know what kind of score I'm giving this place on that, but also the economy and cost of living, and other things, so make sure to stay tuned for all of that. Until then, we're going to see what more of the Capitol Hill neighborhood looks like. Well, people, it is now that time. You can't always judge a book by its cover, and you can't always trust walking the streets of Capitol Hill in the summer. But you can always trust Chris's livability score. When it comes to the education, high schoolers that live in the Capitol Hill neighborhood attend East High School, which is actually a really good high school. East High is ranked among the top in not only the state of Colorado, but in the nation. Despite the overall above-average academic performance, however, there have been some bad things that have happened at East High School recently. Unfortunately so. It's also funded by the city of Denver, and with the way that things are going in the city, quite frankly, it's hard to predict if East High School will remain in such good standing academically going forward. Other elementary schools and middle schools in the area are hit and miss. Education gets a 14 out of 20. Crime is bad in Capitol Hill. It gets a 3 out of 20. The economy is a bright spot as real estate values are sky high currently despite the recent downfall in the prices, and there are plenty of high-paying jobs in downtown Denver despite the low median household income for the Capitol Hill neighborhood. People shouldn't have a difficult time finding a job, though, if they are really trying to, and they live in this neighborhood. It gets a 15 out of 20. Recreational opportunities is next, and there are actually some very nice parks in some of the neighboring neighborhoods, some sizable ones too. The streets overall are pretty walkable as well, but that's if you feel safe walking here. The sun is shining more than not though, and that helps too, and the Rocky Mountains are a half-hour drive west if you can avoid the traffic. Recreation gets a 13 out of 20. The history is strong and present in the Capitol Hill neighborhood through many of the older mansions that still stand. You also have the state capitol building here, along with a handful of the city's oldest churches. Plus, the neighborhood is one of the oldest in the city. History gets a 15 out of 20. Next up is amenities, and you have a nice selection of things to do here, especially with downtown being right by. If you want to go to a sporting event or if you want to go have a fun night out on the town, there are plenty of options within walking distance. Forget your Uber or Lyft app and forget having to drive anywhere, but once again, you just have to watch your back these days walking around anywhere in the area, especially at night. Amenities gets an 18 out of 20. Cost of living is the last category, and given the low median household income in comparison to the sky-high prices of housing, that's not a good combination at all. Cost of living gets a 2 out of 20. All in all, the Chris livability score for the Capitol Hill neighborhood is 80 out of 140, putting it in a tie in second place with the 5 Points neighborhood out of all of the Denver neighborhoods that I've done this for so far. Final thoughts here is my favorite thing about Capitol Hill has to be the collection of older houses. Now, my least favorite thing about Capitol Hill, it's hard to choose because there are quite a few strong negatives. I mean, the positives here are present, whether it's having better than average schools for an urban environment, a strong economy, or having a residential neighborhood with some character, but the negatives are really negative. Like a property crime rate of nearly 7,000 for every 100,000 residents? Yeah, no thanks. If you're going to buy a place in Capitol Hill or rent a place and live here for several years, chances are that you will hear about some kind of property crime happening to your neighbors, or you'll have some kind of property crime happening to, you. I just wouldn't be able to buy here if I were moving to the Denver area. I would have to live out in the suburbs until the city can get its act together with the rising crime rate that we've seen and, quite honestly, with the homeless problem, which is something that nobody seems to know an answer for, and it's sad, but it's a reality. And we can only hope that proper things will take place to give the homeless the resources that they need to be able to turn their lives around. It can't be easy for many who are in that situation, and I get it, but if we knew an answer to the problem, we probably wouldn't have the situation that we have today with large homeless numbers in not only Denver, but in quite a few other major cities across this great country as well. And yes, the United States is a great country. And I think that we lose sight of that sometimes with having the problems that we face constantly being shoved down our throats from the media and, by maybe Me Too. Sorry about that. But yes, the United States is a great country. Well, with that said, I do end the video here, and if you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, as doing all of those things helps these videos destroy the evil monster that is the YouTube algorithm. Also, make sure to hit that notification bell and select yes so that you can be notified every time that I upload a new video. If you enjoyed this video, then you might enjoy checking out some of the featured playlists on this channel. Videos with amazing insights on other places like what you saw here can be found in my Denver playlist or in my Colorado playlist. Last but not least, if you can't get enough of me on here, you can always go follow me on my other social media accounts, and those links are below. We'll see you next time. Peace.